today's masterclass on Lady Macbeth. So just be thinking of these questions as we get started. How much can you recall of the plot, themes and the context of Macbeth? If that's something you're like, I'm not really sure, that's something you can research yourself individually, but you should be thinking about how Lady Macbeth changes over the course of the play, and you should be quite clear on that. We know what she's like at the start, when she's, incredibly ambitious, she's incredibly cruel, and by the end of it she's a broken woman and she's repeatedly washing her hands. That one you should be okay with. So Lady Macbeth demonstrates quite a lot of the key themes. She represents the theme of guilt, the role of women and that of men in the play, the theme of appearance versus reality, ambition and greed, loyalty and betrayal, fate or free will, loss of sleep, and good versus evil. So as a character, she's massively key in the play. So Macbeth's wife, Lady Macbeth, is one of the most powerful female characters in literature, and I think that's why we're still talking about it today. She was well ahead of her time. She, unlike her husband, she's presented at the start as lacking all humanity, as we see well in her opening scene when she calls upon the spirits that tend on mortal thoughts to deprive of her feminine instinct to care. Shockingly, she says that if she had promised Macbeth something and had gone back at it, she would rather smash her baby's face into a wall than do that. She prays for demonic forces to take her over. She's equally driven by equally driven by ambition, and this burning ambition to be queen. Now, there's obviously a lot of debate as to what causes that. Is that because she can't have a child? Is that because her equal relationship with Macbeth has caused her to be a lot more ambition? That's up to you to think about. But she's very much driven by a burning desire to be the queen. So Lady Macbeth persistently taunts Macbeth for his lack of courage. Even though we know he's courageous on the battlefield, remember he's that brave, noble warrior that the captain describes in Act 1, Scene 2, yet she taunts him and calls him weak. So, but in public, she's able to act as the consummate, which means perfect or ideal hostess. She welcomes her victim, the king, into her castle. She faints immediately after the murder of Duncan, and the audience is left wondering whether this too is part of her act. Is she deflecting attention away from Macbeth and what they've done, or does she genuinely faint because she's horrified at what she's done? It's very unclear, and that's where the word perhaps is going to come into play for you. So despite being presented as hardened and ruthless, which was atypical of expectations of women in that era, chastising her husband for not being courageous enough to kill Duncan, the pace of the events eventually becomes too much even for her. So right at the start, she's incredibly cruel. She's incredibly, I suppose, masculine in the traditional sense. But by the end of it, after the fact that she couldn't kill Duncan, it becomes too much, and she becomes horrified at her part in the actions of the play. She becomes mentally deranged, a mere shadow of her former commanding self. She's gibbering by Act 5, Scene 1 as she confesses her part in the murder. You remember the doctor's there watching her, and she's not at all aware that he's even there at all. Her death is the event that causes Macbeth to ruminate, which means ponder or reflect or think over, for one last time on the nature of time and mortality in the speech, tomorrow, tomorrow and tomorrow. So let's have a look at Act 1, Scene 5. Let's have a look at some of her key scenes. So when Lady Macbeth receives this letter, and for me it's one of the most wonderful moments of the play and shows how loving their relationship is, that the first thing he wants to do is tell her, with his promotion, and tell her that he could potentially be king. But her reaction to that letter is really powerful and quite dramatic. As soon as she's finished reading, she's decided she will make Macbeth king. It's as if she and her husband are thinking exactly the same thing. She doesn't hesitate for a moment. They're really, really in sync as characters. So we've got this quote here: "Glamorous thou art and Cawdor, and shalt be what thou art promised." There is no quivering of emotion there. It's very decisive. She is going to be queen and Macbeth is going to be king. So Lady Macbeth at this point invites the spirits of evil to enter her. She knows she has to steel herself, that murder will need evil power, and she's not naturally evil, so she doesn't want to be a woman anymore. She wants to be evil, and she says, "Come ye spirits that tend on mortal thoughts." She knows immediately that murdering Duncan is the only way of quickly achieving her goal. When Macbeth brings further news that Duncan is actually coming to spend the night with them, it becomes clear that her role is to seize the moment and facilitate her husband's rise to kinship. But as I've said a few times, what you've got to remember, this is not a brand new idea. This is an idea that they've discussed previously before the events of the play begin. They've wanted to do this for a while, and they see Duncan's arrival to the castle as their excuse for getting it done. It's like fate has brought him there. So she says at this point, "Oh, never shall sun that morrow see." She knows that Duncan will not make it to the next day. So before the murder at 1 scene 7, you know, how does Lady Macbeth persuade her husband to kill Duncan when he doesn't want to? So remember, Macbeth is not keen. He knows he's going to hell for this. She's the one who persuades him. She's not to blame. Macbeth is still a tragic hero. He does this to himself, but she's like the witches. She acts as a catalyst. Sometimes people describe her as the fourth witch because she acts as a catalyst and causes him, you know, causes his downfall. So she says it was his idea first. This is her opening line, simply pointing out that he raised the idea first. "Was the hope drunk wherein you dress yourself?" So it was his original idea. And she goes on and she taunts Macbeth's masculinity, calling him a coward. This is a really important part of her approach. Macbeth's rank and fame depend on his courage and bravery. She says, "Art thou afeard to be in the same in thine own act and valour as thou art in desire?" She calls him afraid. Remember, men at that time, you know, prized their braveness above all else, and she calls him afraid. She says he can't love her. She uses emotional blackmail. So this personal taunt really hits home for Macbeth. It's unexpected because their relationship is so intense. They really do love each other, and that massively causes the problem. She says, "You know, you've got to prove your love to me. From this time such I count thy love." You've got to prove it. And that is part of the catalyst that sets him off, because they really do love him and they do have a loving, equal relationship. But it's their ambition that actually ruins their relationship in the end. So the morning after the murder in Act 2, Scene 3, without warning during this scene, Lady Macbeth faints. This has been argued about ever since the play was first performed. It's very much a perhaps moment, this. Does she faint to distract attention because the others might see through Macbeth's elaborate excuses? Or is it because she's genuinely shocked and overcome and her strength suddenly leaves her? So it's up to you what your interpretation is there. You know, why do you think she does that? So if she's distracting attention, you could say this depending on how you read the scene. So her line, "Help me hence ho," in Act 2, Scene 3, line 18, could be said in a very theatrical way to distract attention. That, you know, that's all she says in this scene is "help me hence ho," and look at that exclamation mark. It is very, very dramatic. However, you could say that she suddenly feels very alone and scared by Macbeth's words and actions. They planned everything together, but now things are beginning to get out of control with the murder of the two guards. So Macbeth has really taken it far beyond what she thought. She thought, let's kill Duncan and that would be the one thing we do. But Macbeth is like on this path of, you know, of murder, and she doesn't really want to participate in that. So maybe Macbeth has been directing some of his angry words at her, and his fury and menace would really be frightening, especially as in earlier the play she thinks he'll be too mild to kill the king in the first place. She may faint out of sheer shock at the monster that she's brought into being. So it could also be that she's shocked by the guard's murder. She was not prepared. You know, she thinks she's in control. She's told Macbeth exactly what to do, but obviously he's gone off book, so to speak. So that could also be a good point to make. She thought they would kill Duncan, they could forget about it, they'd move on, king and queen, and they'd all live happily ever after. But we know that Macbeth is definitely not a fairy tale. So let's have a look at the banquet and Lady Macbeth in the banquet scene, Act 3, Scene 4. You know, to how does this scene show Lady Macbeth becoming more and more isolated from Macbeth? So after Act 3, the relationship between the Macbeths becomes more and more distant. They do not appear together in the play again, which suggests it's a physical breakdown in their relationship. Their physical separateness shows their emotional separateness, and the fact that Macbeth is isolating himself from even his dearest partner of greatness. So this scene is a turning point in the play because it marks the point where Lady Macbeth loses touch with Macbeth. You know, let's have a look at her reactions during the scene. Her persuasion no longer works on him. She scolds him in the same way as before the murder, but this time it's different. She doesn't really know what's wrong. She can't see Banquo's ghost, but he's no longer responding to her. She cannot understand Macbeth's faith in the supernatural. She's always looking for natural ways of putting things right. So while he prepares for more killing, she's looking for simple, natural ways of coping. A little water, a little sleep. But remember, he's seen the hallucination of the dagger. He's met the witches. He's seen Banquo's ghost, so he's in a completely different position than she is. So Lady Macbeth is still concerned that they act and cope as a couple. This is also really important. She can only really have power through her husband. She has no power of her own. So her main worry is that the guests see them as man and wife, king and queen. There's a couple of key quotations here for you to look at. So, my lord, you do not give the cheer, the feast is sold, the sauce to meat is ceremony, meeting were bare without it. So she says to Macbeth, if you're not a good host and the guests don't feel welcome, they'll feel like they're paying for the meal, which makes the banquet dull. So she is completely plays the game of the hostess, which is where the kind of theatrical element comes from with her fainting. She's playing her role, you know, very, very well. What quite unmanned is folly. I love that quote. Has your foolishness taken away your manliness? She calls Macbeth, the Thane of Cawdor, effectively stupid. Are you so stupid that you're no longer a man? So that was really unusual in Shakespeare's time for a woman to have that much power over her husband and to feel that she can speak to him that way. And let's have a look at this little quote here. Feed and regard him not, she says to Macbeth, are you a man? Everyone can remember that. Are you a man? So in Act 1, Scene 7, she said something very similar. So she becomes very dominant again. She really wants to control Macbeth, and she's manipulating him through the kind of the theme of masculinity and manliness. So in the sleepwalking scene, you know, why does that happen? So she starts sleepwalking because Macbeth has murdered sleep. If you remember in the opening scene with the witches, we get the real sense that they are toying with the Macbeths. And in Act 1, Scene 3 with the witches, and they're talking about how they torment the sailor. They can't kill the sailor, but they can torment him, and one of the way they do that is by controlling the weather so that his boat can't settle, therefore he can't sleep. So, you know, that's one of the reasons she's sleepwalking. So why is she doing that? Why is she talking in her sleep? Because she needs to be cleansed. You know, Lady Macbeth never saw the evil of murder lasting this way. She thought a little water could clear her of this deed, but the blood of Duncan haunts her. You know, that's her conscience, her guilty conscience. She's got Duncan's blood on her hands. She didn't kill him, but she's got that guilt there. So she reruns her own part in the murder to come to terms with the guilt. So this is a really important point. She does not try to blame anyone but herself. Her own words come back to haunt her. So I've said this repeatedly in class. She is guilty because of what she's done. She didn't murder Duncan, but she knows her part in it. And finally, Lady Macbeth is horrified by Macbeth's continued killing. She was devastated by the slaughter of Lady Macduff and her children. She's completely devastated by that. So what does this scene tell us about her part in the play? So as a woman, Lady Macbeth never had the power to control things independently. The sleepwalking scene is very, very intimate. While Macbeth's conscience strikes in a very public banquet, Lady Macbeth's fears shows up in a private setting. This underlines the difference of roles of men and women in the society. Lady Macbeth always saw an end to the process. Once Duncan was dead, power would rest with herself and Macbeth. This is probably, the most important point. She goes over this point in her head. She can't believe that she was so foolish. She was never really an evil person. It was Macbeth who had faith in the supernatural powers. Lady Macbeth invited them in, they possessed her and left her powerless. You know, Macbeth had the power to stop this and he chose not to, but Lady Macbeth often gets the blame that she's the Eve, the temptress in the scenario, when Macbeth had this idea a long time before. The isolation and the separateness from Macbeth has driven her mad. What's her purpose? She's got no children of her own. Macbeth is doing her own thing and she's no longer part of a couple. What else has she got? So Macbeth has gradually broken away from her, leaving her totally isolated in her chamber, which is her bedroom. She desperately wants her former closeness and she can't get it back, and the guilt of what she's done and what she's lost just torments her. So the key themes that we see by Lady Macbeth in Act 5, you know, we see her very much destroyed by the strain as her guilt becomes revealed for all to see. You know, the metaphor of a guilty conscience being represented by the image of sleeplessness is shown in her sleepwalking. She's also constantly seen washing her hands as her guilt has made the stain seen indelible to her. Out, damn spot, all the perfumes of Arabia will not sweeten this little hand. Her rambling words reveal her complicity in Macbeth's crimes. Who would have thought the old man to have so much blood in him? The Thane of Fife had a wife, where is she now? Her reassurance to Macbeth in Act 3, what's done is done, is twisted into despairing admission of guilt. What's done cannot be undone. So, as you discuss how Lady Macbeth's key is presented in a response, your answers must... let me start that again. As you discuss how Lady Macbeth is presented, the key themes she demonstrates must always be included as part of your extended analysis, as well as the beliefs and expectations of society at the time. So you want to mention things like her guilt, you know, the fact that the change, the structural change that she goes through, you know, how she's equal to Macbeth at the start, which was very unusual for the time, but that changes. The fact that her ambition has led to her downfall, that the fact that she betrayed King Duncan caused the betrayal of her own relationship. So you want to reference those themes, and you very much want to reference the context. AO3 is so important. Remember, this was a Jacobean audience. King James I was in charge at the time. Witches, everyone believed them. Women were second-class citizens. You must reference that context. Thank you very much, Year 11, for listening.